Hello everybody and welcome to this week's video. My name is Tasmi Nishat, or Smia for short, and I'm a coach and healer at Nerd for Healing. And this week I'm back in Edmonton visiting my hometown, and yeah, it's definitely been a trip being back in Edmonton. Um, Vancouver has been expanding for me in a lot of ways. Um, and so my body has had to like catch up to all the upgrades and changes that I've been going through while in Vancouver. So being back in Edmonton so far has been like really cool as a break from all of that and just visiting family and stuff. And yeah, that's something I'm gonna write about, like the full extent of the impact of all those changes on my physiology. But yeah, I just wanted to update you on that. So this week's video is pre-recorded as opposed to live because I wanted to be a bit more thorough with this topic, which is how to heal from a toxic or abusive situation. And it's a little bit easier to do that in a pre-recorded video rather than live, so that's why. And yeah, this topic, it can be really, it's a big topic, right? You know, there's a lot of stigma around toxic and abusive situations for getting into them, or um, it just feels difficult to talk about because there's a lot of shame associated with it. So yeah, I just wanted to name that, and that, like, you know, this video is actually inspired by someone who I worked with who was brave enough to share like what they were going through. And so I just want to say that, like, you know, anyone who's been through a toxic or abusive situation and is like healing from it is really brave to do so. Because it's not easy to look at like what's going on and face the stigma and the shame, and like really work with it to heal and move on from it. Much less like actually talking to others and being open about one's experience. I know when I was healing from a lot of toxic and abusive situations, that was the hardest part, is just being open about it. And so that's what ultimately helped set me free, is starting to let go of the shame and the stigma and to be open about it. So yeah, I just wanted to say that for anyone who's going through something similar. So depending on where you're at in healing from a toxic or abusive situation, whether you're still in a situation and you're like transitioning to moving on from it, or you know you've recently kind of got out of a situation, which congratulations, and now you are kind of wanting to deal with the debris and the wreckage from that. Whether still in a situation or you're out and you're recovering from it, there's going to be similar themes like in either situation. So yeah, I think like the first step is being able to see the forest for the trees. It's more applicable if you're still in a toxic or abusive situation, but it still applies if you've been out of one. Because the reason that we end up in toxic or abusive situations in the first place is because our filters for seeing red flags aren't necessarily working. And so we're kind of in a situation and finding it hard to see it for what it actually is because we're so in it. So it's kind of similar to like the frog boiling example. Like if a frog, you know, was in a place in a boiling of hot water, pot of boiling water, it would jump out immediately. But if it was in a kind of like a bearable temperature and you slowly put the heat up, then it would boil to death. So it's kind of like a similar thing with toxic situations. Oftentimes they don't necessarily start out that way, and so we feel like we're relatively safe and comfortable in them until it gets to a point where it's like so bad, right? So yeah, a lot of it is just like, even if you do recognize some red flags, most likely when you're first starting out, when you're in the situation or you're just coming out of it, that there's a lot of things that you might have normalized that are actually pretty fucked up. So the best thing to do for this is actually to get some validation from like a trusted source to help point out like, hey, that thing that they did was actually like super fucked up. So and it's important to be careful about who you get the validation from. The first people that I got validation for my toxic situations, they actually made it worse, and they made me feel worse about. One person said like, "Oh, are you sure it's like not your fault?" And that was someone I really trusted, so that really hurt. So I just want to add that caveat. But like the first thing is to like really recognize and see clearly, get like those filters back up and see like clearly, like, oh shit, like everything that they did was like actually like so fucked up. That thing that they said, that was abusive. That thing, the way that they grabbed me like that was like, that was fucked up. Like just kind of like coming back to you in a sense of like going, holy shit, like okay. Um, so that's like number one in healing from a toxic or abusive situation, is just being able to see it and recognize it clearly. And the number one tool for that is a trusted ally who can help reflect it back to you, right? Um, yeah. And so another thing is there is like, you know, the boiling water thing. Like we're in a situation, it seems okay, then it gets worse. But 90% of the time, the reason that we get into toxic or abusive situations is that because it shares like a resonance from childhood. So, yeah, the way this works is like essentially, like for example, let's say, you know, you had a parent who was like very critical towards you like all the time. And so a lot of times we will attract like for example, a critical partner or a boss because, you know, this is like familiar to us. It doesn't seem like it's messed up because it was normal to us in our childhood. So a lot of times, like our subconscious seeks a familiar because it seems normal, and it also wants to resolve what was unresolved from back then. So, like as a kid, we wanted to get love and validation from our critical parent, and if we didn't get that, we're gonna seek that out in adulthood to kind of close and complete the loop. And the only problem is, like, we can't actually close and complete the loop with the same type of person. The way to resolve it actually is to transcend the pattern, right? But this is the reason why we get in these situations in adulthood, is because, yeah, our subconscious seeks them out. So, which goes to the next point is releasing shame and guilt for getting into toxic situations, because in a sense, our subconscious is way more powerful than our conscious mind. Like maybe consciously we know better, but the drives of our mammalian limbic brain are just so powerful, and unless we have awareness that they're the ones who are running the show, we can have all the awareness we want, but still, if we're not aware of that subconscious, like we can be aware, like, oh, why am I in this toxic situation? But we don't have awareness of um, like the part that is seeking that out, then we're just gonna perpetuate it. And a lot of us, you know, we judge ourselves for that. But if we understand why, it's a lot easier to have compassion and understanding. Because most of the time, it's just an inner child who's looking for love, just in the wrong places. So, really shifting from that shame and guilt to self compassion is huge. And on that note, another way to look at that is like divided will. Part of us knows, like, hey, this situation sucks, like ass. But another part of us is like seeking love and acceptance from like this toxic situation. So that's what's called a divided will, essentially. Two parts are warring against each other, and it creates like a stalemate, right? And so the way to heal that, of course, is to have a dialogue between these two parts and have more understanding. The other thing, though, is learned helplessness. So because toxic situations often have a resonance from childhood, when we're children, we actually, most of the time, like 99% of the time, we don't really have a choice as to like what our situation is. We don't have a lot of autonomy. So if our parents are acting in fucked up ways, like a lot of times we just have to accept it, and we can't really escape from that. So so in a sense, that creates like a sense of like learned helplessness. Like I'm not empowered. Like I can't leave. I can't make choices for it's better for me because I'm stuck with this. And it comes from studies of, you know, dogs who get shocked and have no escape route. And then once they are given an escape route, they're so programmed into helplessness that they don't take the exit route. So just recognize that that can also be a factor in being stuck in toxic or abusive situations. So we've gone through, like, you know, seeing the forest for the trees, getting validation, which is part of seeing the forest for the trees, um, understanding like why we're in these situations or why we've gotten into them, having compassion for ourselves, And then the next part is actually healing the traumatic memories and healing our nervous system from the PTSD that we've experienced from being in these situations. So this is essentially timeline therapy. And so it's essentially kind of going back to those traumatic moments and rewriting them, creating a new memory and a new felt experience. So, depending on how this one, you're going to have to gauge, like, can you do it on your own, or can you, I would always recommend, no matter what the situation is to work with a practitioner. But depending on how traumatic it was, for example, like sexual abuse or something like that, or physical abuse, like definitely it can, if you're going to work on it on your own, you could re-traumatize yourself from going back to that memory. And so I would advise you to unpack it with a practitioner. But in some cases you can unpack it for yourself, so that will just be up to you to gauge like where you're at with that. But yeah, essentially timeline therapy is like going back to those traumatic memories and rewriting them and creating a new felt experience. So for example, like I had a toxic job where my boss, like at one time, like grabbed my hands, and I had, like, then in that moment I went into like a freeze response. But when I thought back onto that memory, it just felt icky, and so what I did to go back and rewrite it is just imagine just shoving his hand off of me and telling him to fuck off. Um, and really kind of getting into that moment and really feeling it, and doing that multiple times until it felt like the memory was different in my system. So yeah, and timeline therapy is not necessarily an easy process. It's arduous and painstaking at times, but it is absolutely worth it to go back and dig and rewrite like the situation and heal our nervous systems from the trauma, essentially. Yeah, so yeah, basically that's oh yeah, another thing is, so the reason we get stuck in these situations is because there's a resonance within our system. So we have to like unnormalize toxic behavior, and two, we need to kind of heal like the weak points where the abuse was able to get in. So like one of my clients, she had an abusive partner, an abusive ex who would call her a slut all the time. And so what I advised her on that situation was to take the charge out of the word slut and see it as neutral. The word slut has a shameful connotation because of sexism and whatnot. But I wanted her to look at it neutrally and see like and take like that sting out of it. It's like, okay, whatever, I'm a slut. Like, so what? Like, her thing, she was kept on saying to me, but like, I'm not a slut. And then I just wanted to challenge her and say, but like, okay, but what if you were? Like, would that be the worst thing in the world? What is so wrong about being a slut? And just taking that sting out of that word. So then, whatever insults or attacks that they have over you has no more power. So you can think about if you've had an emotionally abusive like person in your life, what kind of insults do they throw at you, and can you shift that so it doesn't have power over you anymore? Another example of that was like when I was in my emotionally abusive situation. One of the ammunition for that was like my insecurity about where I was in life. So whenever that they would talk about that, and that would really hurt me because I was really insecure about that. But as soon as I got rid of the insecurity, like that had no more power over me anymore. Yeah. So in a nutshell, basically, you just need to see the situation clearly, get validation, see the forest for the trees, and then understand like why you got into the situation, like what part of you resonated with that or saw it as normal. And three, replace shame and guilt with self-compassion and openness and being able to talk about it openly with trusted people. And then four is doing timeline therapy and going back and rewriting the traumatic memories. So another thing I want to mention is that like a lot of times, these memories, and it won't bother you, the toxic situation, until you are in a more safe environment. That's often when the traumatic memories actually come up. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. Is like if you've recently gone out of a situation, like your system will need some time to adjust from being out of that. And yeah, if you are still in a toxic or abusive situation, just know that it's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's more common than you think. And that I would urge you to talk about it with trusted people. Use helplines, um, and just kind of start to inch your way forward and out of that situation, and get help and get support. So yeah, so now we're gonna end. We're gonna start the tapping now, which is a tapping on forgiving yourself, as well as getting rid of any programs that might have thought that you deserved this kind of abuse. So, for those who don't know, EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Technique, and um, it is basically psychological acupuncture. It helps to rewire and reprogram our nervous system, and it's a really powerful tool. For most people, some people it doesn't work with, but most people it does work with. So, you can just follow after me, and feel free to sub in what I say with whatever is more relevant for you. So here we go at that cardio check point. Even though I got into a toxic or abusive situation, or I'm still am in one, and I feel like I should have known better, I feel ashamed for having gone into the situation. I feel like a part of me maybe thought I deserved this abuse. But even though I feel like I should have known better than to get into this situation, and I judge myself for it, I deeply and completely love, accept, and forgive myself. I choose to release this judgment that I should have known better, because really it was just a hurt inner child that was either looking for safety or love. And instead of berating myself for thinking I should have known better, I want to be more compassionate with myself, be more understanding, understand where I was coming from, understand the hurt inner child within me. So even though I feel ashamed sometimes for getting into a toxic or abusive situation, and I feel like I should have known better, I'm choosing to release that judgment and shame and guilt and replace it with self-compassion and self-forgiveness. Because I deeply and completely love, accept, and forgive myself. I choose to be on my own side. I choose to be there for myself. And I choose to be proud of myself for coming this far and starting to heal and change patterns and have more awareness and have my own best interests at heart. Releasing the belief, if I have any, that I deserved any kind of abuse, which couldn't be farther from the truth, and replace it with knowing that I deserve respect, love, and compassion, and that I deserve that for myself. Maybe I needed to berate myself to survive as a kid, but I don't have to do that anymore. I'm choosing to let go of these patterns Replace it with love and compassion instead. Because I deeply and completely love, accept, and forgive myself. I commit to gentleness and softness and understanding moving forward. And every day, I'm going to practice this new way of being because I deeply and completely love, accept, and forgive myself. Let's finish out the tapping. Okay. Well, thank you for watching this video, and I hope it's helpful. And feel free to message me if you have any questions whatsoever. Okay, thank you.